Imagine being 13 years old. You are a peasant child. You cannot read. You cannot write. You have never left your small village. The world you know is made up of fields and farm work and the sound of your mother's prayers before bed. And then a voice speaks to you. Not a human voice. Not a voice you can explain. A voice that tells you God has chosen you. A child, a girl, with no title and no army, to save an entire nation. Most of us, if we heard something like that, would wonder if we were going mad. We would tell no one. We would go back to our work and forget it ever happened. Joan of Arc didn't forget. And because she didn't, the history of France and the history of the world was changed forever. Welcome, everyone. Today, we are telling the full story of Saint Joan of Arc. Her childhood, her visions, her impossible courage, the battles she won, and the betrayal she suffered. And why, 6 centuries later, the Church still calls her a saint, and millions of people around the world still look to her as a model of faith, bravery, and surrender to God's will. This is her story, and it is one of the most remarkable stories ever told. Part 1. The world Joan was born into. To understand Joan of Arc, we first have to understand the world she was born into, because that world was, to put it plainly, a world on fire. The year is 1412. France is not yet the unified country we know today. It is a patchwork of kingdoms, alliances, and bitter rivalries. And for over 70 years, nearly 3 generations, France has been locked in a brutal, grinding war with England. We call it the 100 Years' War today, and the name alone tells you how exhausting and devastating it was. The English had a powerful claim to the French throne, and they had been pressing that claim with armies, siege weapons, and devastating raids across the French countryside. By the time Joan was born, the English, allied with the powerful Burgundian faction within France itself, controlled enormous swathes of French territory, including Paris, the capital. The rightful heir to the French throne, a young man named Charles VII, had not yet been crowned king. He had been driven from Paris, and he sat at his court in the town of Chinon, uncertain, surrounded by advisors who debated endlessly, and by many accounts, deeply lacking in confidence in himself and his cause. France was losing. The people of France, especially in the countryside, were suffering enormously. Villages were burned, crops were destroyed, men were killed or conscripted, women and children fled. Disease and famine followed in the wake of the armies. It was into this broken, war-torn world that a little girl named Johanna, we know her as Joan, was born in a small village called Domrémy in the region of Lorraine, in northeastern France. Domrémy was a modest place, a tiny village of farmers and laborers. Joan's family, the Dark family, were not nobles. They were not wealthy, but they were considered respectable among the peasant class. Her father, Jacques d'Arc, was a local landowner of modest means. He farmed, and he also served as a kind of village official. Her mother, Isabelle Romé, was a devout woman, deeply faithful, who raised her children in the Catholic faith. Joan was one of 5 children. She grew up in a small stone house near the church of the village. She spent her days doing what most village girls of her time did, helping her mother with household work, tending the animals, spinning thread. She did not go to school. There were no schools for girls like her. She could not read. She could not write, but she could pray. And she did, constantly, fervently, with a depth of devotion that even her neighbors noticed and remarked upon. From a very young age, Joan was known in her village as an unusually pious child. She loved the church. She loved going to Mass. She loved confession. She was the kind of child who, when the other children were playing in the fields, could sometimes be found kneeling alone in prayer. Her mother, Isabel, told her stories of the saints, the lives of St. Catherine, St. Margaret, St. Michael the Archangel. These were the heroes of Joan's childhood. Not warriors or kings, but holy men and women who had suffered and trusted God and been rewarded in eternity. And yet, the world around Joan was filled with the sounds of war. Domrémy sat near the border of territories controlled by France's enemies, and the village lived in constant fear. At times, the villagers had to flee into the forest or take refuge in a nearby fortified town when raiding parties came through. Joan saw suffering. She understood, even as a small child, what it meant for her country to be at war. She heard the adults talk. She heard the despair in their voices when they spoke about the English, about the Burgundians, about the Dauphin, the uncrowned king who seemed unable to rally the country. She heard prayers for deliverance. She did not know yet that she would be that deliverance. Part 2. The voices begin. It was the summer of 1424. Joan was approximately 12 or 13 years old. She was in her father's garden, a perfectly ordinary afternoon, the kind of afternoon that thousands of ordinary afternoons are made of. And then the light changed. Later, when she was put on trial and forced to account for every detail of her life, Joan described what happened with careful, measured words. She said she saw a great brightness. She heard a voice she described as coming from the direction of the church, on her right side. It was the first time she had heard it. She was afraid. The voice told her to be good, to go to church often. It told her that God would help her. That was all, at first. But the voice came back, again and again. She came to understand, over time, that the voices she was hearing were those of holy figures. Saint Michael the Archangel, Saint Catherine of Alexandria, and Saint Margaret of Antioch. These were not obscure figures to Joan. They were the great saints she had grown up hearing about. To her, their appearance was not random. It was personal. It was God breaking into her ordinary life. Now, before we go further, I want to pause here, because this is the point where people today often get stuck. Voices, visions. Many people, hearing this, will immediately think of mental illness, of hallucination, of a troubled child who was confused or frightened. I want to be honest with you. Historians have debated this for 600 years, and they continue to debate it today. Some argue that Joan suffered from epilepsy or a neurological condition that caused her experiences. Others point to the trauma of living in a war zone or to intense religious fervor. But here is what is remarkable and undeniable, regardless of how you explain the source of Joan's visions. What she did as a result of them was extraordinary. A 13-year-old illiterate peasant girl with no military training, no connections, no power, went on to command armies, win battles, and change the course of history. Whatever the origin of her voices, their fruit was real. And for those who approach this story with faith, as millions have for centuries, the explanation is simpler and more profound. God chose her, as he had chosen Moses, as he had chosen David, as he had chosen Mary. God looked at a small, quiet, devout girl in a forgotten village and said, "You, I will use you." For 3 years, Joan kept the voices mostly to herself. She obeyed them. She went to church more. She prayed more, she fasted, she made vows of chastity. She promised God she would remain pure as long as the voices asked it of her. She grew more and more serious, more withdrawn from the games and gossip of village life. Her neighbors noticed the change in her, but did not understand it. Her father, Jacques, was a proud and practical man. He had heard, through some premonition or village rumor, that his daughter might one day run off with soldiers, and the thought horrified him. In that era, a girl who traveled with soldiers was assumed to be a woman of ill repute. Her father told her brothers that he would rather drown Joan himself than see her come to that kind of dishonor. Joan knew none of this tenderness was malicious. Her father loved her. Her family loved her. But they could not hear what she heard. They could not see what she saw. As she grew older, 14, 15, 16, the voices became more urgent, more specific. They began to give her a mission. Go, they said. Go to France. Go to the Dauphin. Go to the uncrowned king who sits in his court without hope. Tell him God has sent you. You will drive the English out of France. You will see Charles crowned King of France at Reims. Think about what that meant. Joan was 16 years old. She had never been more than a few miles from her village. She had never held a sword. She had never commanded anything. She had no horses, no armor, no letters of introduction, no political connections, no way to get an audience with anyone in power, let alone the heir to the throne of France. And God was telling her to do all of this. This is the moment where most people would have said, no, this is not possible. This is not for me. Someone else will do this. I am just a girl. Joan said yes. She did not say yes immediately. She argued. She told the voices she didn't know how to ride a horse or fight. She said she was just a poor girl who knew nothing of riding and warfare. The voices persisted. They were not unkind, but they were clear. Go. God commands it. It is one of the most striking patterns in sacred history. God does not always choose the prepared. He chooses the willing. And then he prepares them. Part 3. Leaving Domrémy. The impossible journey begins. Baudricourt laughed at her. He told the man who had brought her to him to take her home and box her ears for her insolence. She went home, but she came back, again and again. She was persistent in a way that defied easy explanation. Most 16-year-old girls, rejected and humiliated by a powerful military commander, would not return. Joan returned. During this period, something significant happened. Something that would both galvanize Joan's mission and break the hearts of all who heard it. The city of Orléans, one of the last major French-held cities south of the Loire River, came under siege by the English. Orléans was not just any city. It was a strategic keystone. If it fell, the English advance into the heart of France would be nearly unstoppable. Its fall would likely mean the end of the French cause entirely. The news of Orléans spread like a cold wind across France. The Dauphin's advisors were desperate. The French armies had been unable to break the siege. The city was slowly starving. There seemed to be no hope. And then something extraordinary happened in Vaucouleurs. Word began to spread about this persistent girl from Domrémy. This girl who kept showing up, claiming to have a mission from God. People began to listen. Common soldiers began to take her seriously. A prophecy had been circulating in France for years. An old prophecy that said France would be made desolate by a woman and restored by a maiden from the borders of Lorraine. Joan was from the borders of Lorraine. Whether or not Baudricourt believed her, enough pressure built around him that in February of 1429, he relented. He gave Joan an escort of soldiers. He gave her a sword. One of the men who would travel with her, Jean de Metz, later recalled that when he asked Joan if she truly believed she could accomplish what she claimed, she replied simply, "I would rather be spinning at home beside my poor mother, for this is not my station. But I must go, and I will go, for my Lord wills it." The journey from Vaucouleurs to Chinon, where the Dauphin held his court, was approximately 500 kilometers. It took 11 days, mostly through territory controlled by the enemy. Joan and her small escort traveled at night to avoid detection. They crossed rivers. They moved through hostile territory. It was winter. They slept on the ground. One of the soldiers who traveled with her later testified that despite the conditions, despite sleeping rough, despite riding for days in armor, despite being surrounded by rough military men, Joan remained utterly composed. She prayed. She was cheerful. She did not complain. And he noted with some wonder, despite traveling with a group of soldiers for 11 days through the wilderness, she maintained her purity absolutely. No one touched her. The men respected her in a way they themselves could not fully explain. She arrived at Chinon in early March, 1429. Part 4. Meeting the Dauphin. Faith under scrutiny. The court of Charles VII at Chinon was a place of intrigue, despair, and faded grandeur. Charles himself was a complicated young man. He was only 26 years old, deeply uncertain of his own legitimacy, surrounded by advisors who disagreed about everything, and living in the long shadow of a father who had been declared mad and a mother who had publicly questioned whether Charles was even the rightful heir to the throne. In short, Charles VII was a man who had every reason to doubt himself. He was not the confident king the moment demanded. When word came that a peasant girl from Lorraine was at the gate claiming to have been sent by God to save France, his reaction was, understandably, skepticism. His advisors were divided. Some thought she was dangerous. Some thought she might be a spy. Some thought she was simply mad. Others, desperate and willing to grasp at anything, urged him to see her. He agreed to a meeting, but he decided to test her first. He dressed in common clothes and hid himself among the crowd of courtiers. He put another man in the royal seat, dressed as the king. Joan walked into the great hall at Chinon and went straight to Charles. She had never seen him before. She had no way of knowing who he was, and yet she walked directly to him and said, in effect, "God has sent me to you, the true heir of France." The effect on those present was profound. Some were still skeptical. Charles himself was cautious, but he was also shaken. He pulled Joan aside and spoke with her privately. We do not know exactly what was said in that private conversation. Joan never revealed it publicly, and neither did Charles. But whatever she said to him in those moments, some believed she revealed to him a private prayer he had once made to God in his most desperate hour. It changed him. He emerged from the conversation different. Something in him had shifted. Even so, Charles did not simply hand Joan an army and send her off. He was a cautious man by nature, and his advisors demanded proof. Joan was sent to the nearby city of Poitiers, where a panel of theologians, scholars, and churchmen examined her for 3 weeks. They questioned her about her faith, her visions, her mission, her morality. They were trying to determine whether she was truly sent by God, or whether she was a fraud, a heretic, or something worse. The examination was rigorous. Joan faced men of learning, men who could debate theology in Latin, who had studied the Bible and the Church Fathers for decades. Joan could not read. She had received no formal education, and yet, by all accounts, she held her own. She answered their questions with a directness and a clarity that silenced her critics. When they asked her for a sign, proof that her mission was genuine, she reportedly replied that she hadn't come to Poitiers to perform signs. Her sign would come at Orléans. "Give her the army," she said, "and she would show them what God could do." The examiners concluded that they found nothing wrong with her. She was of good character, of sound faith, of sincere piety. They recommended that Charles support her mission. The army would be given to Joan of Arc. Part 5. The Maid of Orléans, a nation saved. Joan arrived at Orléans on April 29th, 1429. She was 17 years old. She had been given command, or at least co-command, of the French relief army. She had a banner made, white, emblazoned with the name of Jesus, the image of God the Father, and lilies. She carried it into battle because, she said, she wanted to avoid shedding blood herself, even as she commanded those who fought, and then she led them. What happened at Orléans over the next 9 days is one of the most astonishing military turnarounds in history. The English had held the siege of Orléans for 7 months. 7 months of slow strangulation. The city's defenders had been unable to break out. The French relief efforts had failed. The English fortifications around the city were formidable. Joan changed everything, not primarily through brilliant military strategy, though she did demonstrate real tactical instincts that surprised her commanders. She changed everything through something harder to quantify: morale, hope, the absolute conviction that God was with them. She sent letters to the English commanders before the fighting began. Bold, almost startling letters that announced herself and demanded they surrender and withdraw. The English were contemptuous. They insulted her. They called her a cowherd. They made threats. Joan wept when she received their response, but she did not waver. The French forces, energized and emboldened in a way they hadn't been in years, began to attack the English fortifications surrounding Orléans. Battle by battle, day by day, the English positions fell. Joan was not merely a figurehead. She was in the thick of it. She rode with her soldiers. She was struck by an arrow during the battle for the fortress called Les Tourelles. The arrow pierced her between the neck and shoulder, going through her armor. She pulled it out herself. She prayed. She went back into the fight. The English were stunned. The French were electrified. On May 8th, 1429, 9 days after Joan had arrived, the English abandoned the siege of Orléans. They retreated. The city was free. The liberation of Orléans was more than a military victory. It was a spiritual earthquake. The news spread across France and across Europe with the speed that only the most stunning reversals of fortune can spread. A peasant girl, sent by God, people said, had done what the greatest French commanders had been unable to do for 7 months. She had lifted the siege of Orléans. Joan became known as La Pucelle, the Maid of Orléans. The soldiers who fought with her were transformed. Men who had been demoralized and half defeated were suddenly willing to march and fight and die with a fervor they had not felt in years. Something had changed in the atmosphere of the war. Providence, many believed, had entered the field. The victories continued. In the weeks following Orléans, Joan led the French forces in a series of rapid strikes along the Loire River, retaking town after town from the English. The speed and decisiveness of the campaign was breathtaking. Commanders who had spent years moving cautiously and losing ground were now advancing and winning. And then came the coronation march, the most daring part of Joan's mission, and the one that her voices had told her from the beginning was God's command. She would take the Dauphin to Reims. Part 6. The coronation at Reims. a promise kept. The city of Reims was deep in territory controlled by France's enemies. It was the traditional place where French kings were crowned, the site of the sacred anointing that made a dauphin into a true king. For Charles to be crowned at Reims would be not just a political act, but a spiritual one, a statement to all of France and all of Europe that God had chosen him. But getting there was another matter. The road to Reims passed through enemy territory. Towns and fortresses held by the English and their Burgundian allies lay between the French army and the cathedral. Many of Charles's advisors said it was too risky. It was madness to attempt it. The campaign along the Loire had been successful, yes, but a march to Reims? That was something else entirely. Joan insisted. Her voices had told her. This was God's command. She would not stop until Charles was crowned. And so they marched. The French army, with Joan at its head, moved through the heart of enemy France. Town after town opened its gates, some after battles, some simply surrendering when word arrived that La Pucelle was coming. The reputation that had been forged at Orleans preceded her like a banner. The psychological impact of her presence was immense. Enemies hesitated. Allies rallied. On July 17th, 1429, Charles VII was crowned King of France in the Cathedral of Notre-Dame de Reims in one of the most magnificent coronation ceremonies the medieval world had seen. Joan was there, standing beside him, holding her white banner. She later said, in her own simple, direct way, that she had asked to hold the banner at the coronation because the banner had shared in the toil and the danger, and it was right that it should share in the honor. Think about this moment. She was 17 years old. 10 months earlier, she had been an illiterate peasant girl in a forgotten village in Lorraine. She had no title, no education, no power. And now she stood in one of the greatest cathedrals in the Christian world, having accomplished both things her voices had promised. Orleans was free, and Charles was king. Many people in her position would have considered the mission complete. The voices had asked two things of her. She had done both. Surely now she could go home. Surely now she could return to her mother, to her village, to the quiet life of prayer and work that had formed her. But the war was not over. And Joan, though she had fulfilled what the voices had commanded, was still needed. Or at least, Charles still needed her. The war continued, and Joan would march on. What she could not know, what none of them knew, was that her time was running out. Part 7. Capture, Betrayal, and the Trial. After the coronation, the campaign began to stall. The political situation was enormously complicated. Charles VII was now king, but he was a man of complex calculations. He was pursuing negotiations with the Burgundians, the French faction that had allied with England, and some of his advisors believed peace through diplomacy was more achievable than peace through continued military victory. Joan wanted to push forward. She believed the momentum could be maintained, that Paris could be taken, that the English could be driven from France. She was not wrong in her military instincts, but she was wrong about the political will. The assault on Paris in September 1429 failed. It was a hard battle, and Joan was wounded again, struck in the thigh by a crossbow bolt. The French forces were ordered to retreat. Joan wept. She believed they could have taken the city. Charles ordered her to fall back. It was the beginning of a difficult period. The brilliant, rapid victories of the spring and summer gave way to a slower, more political conflict. Joan continued to fight. She led campaigns in the Loire Valley through the winter. but the overwhelming momentum of Orléans was behind her. In May of 1430, she was besieging the city of Compiègne, which was held by the Burgundians. During a skirmish, the gates of Compiègne were closed, the French were retreating inside, and Joan and a small group of soldiers were left outside the walls. She was surrounded. She fought. She refused to surrender until she was pulled from her horse. Joan of Arc was captured by the Burgundians on May 23, 1430. What happened next is one of the darkest chapters in the story. The Burgundians sold her to the English. Charles VII, the king she had crowned, the man she had saved, made no serious effort to ransom her or rescue her. His complex political calculations did not include spending political capital on the girl who had saved his throne. Joan sat in prison. She was held in a castle in Normandy, in a cell, guarded by soldiers. She attempted to escape, at least twice. Once she jumped from a tower that was reportedly 70 feet high, landing in a dry moat. She survived, unconscious, and was recaptured. She was, throughout her captivity, both afraid and brave. She later admitted that the leap from the tower was an act of despair as much as courage. She had been told by her voices not to jump, and she had disobeyed. She wept, she confessed. She was forgiven. She faced her imprisonment with extraordinary resilience, but she was also human, and she suffered. The trial of Joan of Arc began in January of 1431. It was a church trial, presided over by the Bishop of Beauvais, Pierre Cauchon, who was deeply aligned with the English and Burgundian cause. The trial was intended to destroy Joan's credibility and, by extension, to delegitimize the coronation of Charles VII, to prove that the miracle of Orléans had been not a divine act, but a heretical deception. The charges against Joan were numerous: heresy, idolatry, claiming false revelations, wearing men's clothing, refusing to submit to the authority of the church. The men who conducted the trial were learned, skilled, and ruthless. They questioned her relentlessly, session after session, week after week. Joan had no advocate. She had no lawyer. She was alone against a court of ecclesiastical experts who had prepared their case for months, and she held her own. The transcripts of the trial of Joan of Arc survive to this day, and they are among the most remarkable documents in history. Joan's answers to her accusers are direct, sharp, and deeply faithful. When they tried to trick her with subtle theological questions, she deflected with simple honesty. When they asked her whether she was in a state of grace, a question designed to trap her, since claiming certainty about one's state of grace could be considered presumptuous, while denying it could be seen as admission of guilt, Joan replied,
"If I am not, may God put me there. If I am, may God keep me there."
Her judges were stunned into silence. But the outcome was never truly in doubt. This was not a fair trial. It was a political execution dressed in religious language. Joan was worn down by months of imprisonment, by constant interrogation, by fear and isolation. At one point, she briefly signed a document of abjuration, a recantation in which she agreed to submit to the church's authority and abandon her claims about her voices. She was promised that if she signed, she would be handed to a church prison rather than an English one. She signed. But within days, she recanted the recantation. She put her men's clothes back on. She had continued to wear them in part because her guards had repeatedly tried to assault her, and the men's clothes gave her more physical protection. And she declared that her voices had spoken to her again, and she would not deny them. It was the decision that sealed her fate. She was declared a relapsed heretic. The sentence was death. Part 8. The Fire and the Light that Followed. On May 30th, 1431, Joan of Arc was led to the marketplace of Rouen. She was 19 years old. She was dressed in a long garment and placed on a tall scaffold so that all could see her clearly. A tall pile of wood had been built beneath her. She asked for a cross. A soldier made her a small cross from sticks, which she took and held against her chest. A crucifix was brought from a nearby church and held up before her so she could see it. She cried out the name of Jesus repeatedly. When the flames rose, many of those who watched, including some of the English soldiers who had come to see their enemy destroyed, wept. One soldier, seeing what was happening, said he was afraid. An English secretary who witnessed the execution said afterward, "We have burned a saint." Joan of Arc was dead. Her ashes were gathered and thrown into the Seine River so that her body could not be preserved as relics and venerated by her followers. But you cannot burn an idea. You cannot drown a saint. The war continued after Joan's death. The English and Burgundians may have hoped that killing her would reverse the momentum she had created. It did not. The memory of Joan, the legend of La Pucelle, continued to inspire French soldiers and French people. Gradually, over the following decades, France reasserted control. By 1453, the 100 Years' War was effectively over, and the English had been driven from nearly all of France. The nation that Joan had given her life survived. In 1455, more than 20 years after her execution, Pope Calixtus III authorized a retrial of Joan's case at the request of her mother, Isabelle Romée, and her brothers. The retrial examined the original proceedings and found them to be deeply flawed, politically motivated, procedurally corrupt, legally unjust. On July 7th, 1456, Joan of Arc was declared innocent of all charges. The verdict of 1431 was annulled. It had taken 25 years for the Church to correct the injustice, but it was corrected. For the next 4 centuries, Joan remained a beloved figure in France, a patriot, a heroine, an icon. She was celebrated in plays, poems, paintings, and songs. In the 19th century, as France experienced national revival and a renewed interest in saints, the cause for her canonization began to move seriously forward. On April 18, 1909, Joan of Arc was beatified by Pope Pius X. On May 16, 1920, she was canonized, officially declared a saint of the Catholic Church by Pope Benedict XV. The girl who had been burned as a heretic in 1431 was declared a saint in 1920. It took almost 500 years. But the Church, in the end, recognized what many had seen all along, that Joan of Arc had lived a life of heroic virtue, that her faith had been genuine, that her mission had borne extraordinary fruit, and that her death had been a martyrdom, not for heresy, but for truth. Part 9. What Joan is the patron saint of, and why it matters. When the Catholic Church names someone a patron saint, it is a statement about what that person's life represented, what intercessory role they are believed to play in heaven, and who might most powerfully turn to them in prayer. Joan of Arc is the patron saint of several groups and causes, and each one tells us something important about the life she lived. She is the patron saint of France. This is perhaps the most obvious designation. Joan gave her life for France. She was willing to endure everything, ridicule, danger, imprisonment, and death, for the sake of her country. France celebrates her feast day, May 30th, as a national holiday. She is one of the most beloved figures in French national identity, celebrated not only by Catholics, but by all French citizens as a symbol of courage and patriotism. She is the patron saint of soldiers. Joan led armies. She rode into battle. She was wounded in combat. She rallied men who had lost hope. For soldiers throughout history, people who must face danger and death in the service of a cause they believe in, Joan of Arc represents the ideal of courage without cruelty, of fighting with a moral purpose, of trusting God even in the most chaotic and terrifying circumstances. She is the patron saint of prisoners. Joan spent the last year of her life as a prisoner, isolated, questioned, threatened, and ultimately condemned. She knows what it is to be helpless in the hands of those who have power over you, those who are imprisoned, whether justly or unjustly. Find in Joan an intercessor who has been where they are. She is the patron saint of people ridiculed for their piety. From the beginning of her mission, Joan was mocked. The commander Robert de Baudricourt laughed at her. The English soldiers called her a cowherd. Even some of her own commanders were skeptical of her. She suffered the particular loneliness of being someone whose faith was genuine in a world that found it suspect. Those who are mocked for their belief, those who are dismissed because they take God seriously, they have in Joan a saint who walked that path before them. She is also invoked as a patron of women in leadership, of captives, and of those who are misunderstood or falsely accused. There is something profoundly important in this list. Joan was not a quiet saint who spent her life in a monastery writing prayers. She was not a martyr who died peacefully in bed of a holy sickness. She was a saint who got her hands dirty. She wore armor. She bled on battlefields. She argued with lawyers and bishops. She was afraid and she was brave. She made mistakes. She jumped from a tower in despair. She momentarily signed a recantation she didn't believe, and she was forgiven for them. And she got back up. She is a saint for the messy, complicated, dangerous business of actual life. Part 10. Joan's Legacy. 6 centuries of inspiration. Visuals, paintings, statues, films, modern women in leadership, churches. 600 years after her death, Joan of Arc remains one of the most written about, painted, sculpted, filmed, and debated figures in human history. Why? What is it about this teenage peasant girl from medieval France that continues to capture the imagination of the world? Part of it is the sheer improbability of her story. In any age, a story about someone with no privilege, no education, no power, and no connections who rises to change the course of history is compelling. In Joan's case, add to that the element of the divine calling, the claim that behind her impossible rise was not ambition or luck, but the will of God, and you have a story that cuts to the deepest questions any human being can ask. What am I called to? What does God want of me? Am I brave enough to answer? Writers have been wrestling with Joan for centuries. Shakespeare wrote about her, though not very kindly. Voltaire wrote a famous, mocking poem about her that he later regretted. Mark Twain, who is not typically associated with Catholic hagiography, was so moved by her story that he wrote what he considered his best book, a fictionalized life of Joan of Arc. He called her the most extraordinary person the human race has ever produced. She has been the subject of major films, from Carl Theodor Dreyer's silent masterpiece to the Luc Besson action epic to the luminous performance of Ingrid Bergman. She has inspired operas, plays, novels, sculptures, and paintings beyond counting. The most famous statue of her, the gilded equestrian statue in Paris, stands near the Place des Pyramides, and flowers are laid at its base every year on her feast day. But the deepest part of Joan's legacy is not artistic or political. It is spiritual. Every year, millions of people pray to Joan of Arc. They light candles before her image. They ask for her intercession. Soldiers who are afraid ask her to pray for them. Women who are in positions of leadership and feel isolated and dismissed ask for her courage. People who are imprisoned, whether in literal cells or in the invisible prisons of addiction, depression, fear, and despair, ask her to intercede for them. And quietly, in her own way, she does what she always did. She points them not to herself, but to God. Her voice has always told her to be good, to go to church often, to trust God completely. That was the message at 13 years old in her father's garden, and it was the message she carried to the fire. She did not save France by herself. She said so repeatedly, with characteristic directness. I do nothing but in the name of God. She was the instrument. God was the actor. The glory was not hers, and she never pretended it was. That humility, that total surrender to God's will, in the face of ridicule, danger, pain, and death, is what makes her a saint. Not the battles won, not the king crowned, but the simple, daily, costly choice to say, "Yes, Lord, whatever you ask." Even this, even now. Part 11, what Joan teaches us today. We live in a world that is very different from 15th century France. We do not fight with swords and siege weapons. Most of us will never face the literal kind of battlefield Joan walked onto, and most of us will not hear voices in a garden telling us to ride to the king. But Joan's story is not really about 15th century France. It is about you. It is about me. It is about what happens when an ordinary person takes God seriously. Think about the things we learn from Joan. First, God calls the unlikely. Joan was not the obvious choice. She was not a military leader, a scholar, a noble, or even a man. She was a peasant girl. If God were writing a story designed to make the most logical sense, Joan of Arc would not be in it. But God's logic is not our logic. He consistently works through people who, by the world's standards, have nothing to offer. And through them, He does what the world calls impossible. Who are the unlikely people in your own life who might be carrying a calling you haven't recognized yet? Who might you be? Second, courage is not the absence of fear. Joan was afraid. She admitted it. When she pulled an arrow out of her own shoulder, she wept before going back into battle. When she was in prison, she was frightened and desperate enough to jump from a tower. She was not a superhero. She was a person who felt fear and acted anyway. That is what courage is. The voices never promised her that it would be easy or painless. They just promised that God would be with her. Third, faithfulness, not a success, is the measure. Joan didn't win every battle. The assault on Paris failed. She was captured. She was condemned. By the world's measurement of success, her story ends in a terrible defeat. A 19-year-old burned alive in a town square. And yet the church calls her a saint, because faithfulness to God's call, even unto death, is not failure. It is the deepest kind of victory. Fourth, the truth is not always recognized immediately. It took 25 years to clear her name. It took almost 500 years for her to be canonized. The injustice done to Joan was real and terrible, and it was not corrected quickly. But it was corrected. The truth, in the end, held. It always does. And fifth, holiness is available to everyone. Joan was not a nun. She was not a theologian. She was not educated or refined or powerful. She was a farm girl who loved God and tried to do what he asked. That is the only qualification she had. And it was enough. It is always enough. We began today in a garden. A 13-year-old girl, alone in the summer light, hearing a voice she could not explain and could not ignore. We end the same way, with an ordinary person, with God, with a calling. Joan of Arc was buried in obscurity, her ashes scattered in a river, her name condemned by a corrupt court. But she would not stay buried. She never has. 6 centuries have passed, and she is still here, still inspiring, still interceding, still pointing toward the God who sent her. She is the patron saint of France, of soldiers, of prisoners, of the ridiculed and the misunderstood. She is the Maid of Orleans. She is the girl who heard a voice and said yes. She is, in every age, a reminder that God hasn't run out of impossible assignments, that he hasn't stopped looking for willing hearts in unlikely places, that wherever there is a child, or a person, or a man or woman on the edge of something terrifying and beautiful, who is afraid and faithful and wondering whether they heard correctly, he is saying,
Go, I will be with you. Go.
Thank you so much for watching. If this story moved you, if it gave you something to carry into your week, I hope you'll share it. Leave a comment below and tell me, what part of Joan's story speaks most to you? If you'd like to learn more, I've left some resources in the description. Books, documentaries, and links to the original trial transcripts, which you can actually read online. They are extraordinary. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. We have many more stories of faith, courage, and history coming. Stories that I believe have the power to change how we see the world and our place in it. God bless you. Goodbye for now.